I've been a mother, a sister, a silent provider for my little sister for over a decade, paying for her tuition, her rent, even the Christmas decorations in the apartment she lives in. And yet, with just one message, this Christmas is for people who fit the vibe, she erased me from her life like I never existed. It was 6:37 a.m. when I finally took off my work boots and collapsed onto the second-hand couch in my one-bedroom apartment. My arms ached, my back felt like it had splintered into 4 different directions, and the smell of cardboard and warehouse dust still clung to my hoodie. I'd just finished a double shift Amazon during the night, and 2 extra hours helping unload trucks because someone had called in sick. My knees were killing me. The coffee I'd made 20 hours ago was still sitting on the table stone cold. I didn't bother reheating it. I reached for my phone out of habit more than anything. One new message from Lily. For a moment, I felt a tiny flicker of warmth despite the numbness crawling up my legs. I hadn't heard much from her lately. She was always too busy. She said too many meetings, work trips, adulting as she called it in that charmingly dismissive tone. But it was December 17th, and for a second, I allowed myself to hope it was a text inviting me over for the holidays. I had already transferred her the usual amount earlier that week, $500 to help her set the mood, at her new place in San Francisco. She wanted her first Christmas party to be tasteful, classy, and she'd sent me links to velvet tablecloths and minimalist centerpieces that cost more than my weekly groceries. I hadn't hesitated. I never do. I tapped open the message. Hey, Sarah, just wanted to give you a heads up. We're keeping Christmas very curated this year, super intimate. Just a few friends and co-workers who fit the vibe. Hope you understand, I read it once. Then again. My thumb hovered over the screen. My first thought was, she made a typo. She meant intimate, right. I mean, curated is something you say about art exhibits, not holiday dinners. But then I noticed the careful phrasing. Friends and co-workers who fit the vibe. No mention of family. No mention of me? No room apparently for the person who paid for her 4 years of private college, who covered her rent when her stipend ran out, who worked through Christmas for 8 years straight so that she could have one more present under the tree, one more semester without financial aid stress. I put the phone down on the coffee table. Next to it, neatly folded, was the printed confirmation of her latest dorm fee payment. I'd printed it out 2 days ago, filed it away with the others. The amount, $1,100 tuition, housing, and an extra $500 for the decorations. Not a thank you, not even a hope to see you. Just hope you understand. I did. Oh, I understood it so well that it hurt. Not rage. I wasn't angry, not in the explosive flip the table way. That would have been easier, cleaner. What I felt was much heavier, something quieter, more precise. A coldness settling somewhere in my chest, like a faucet had been turned off without warning. I leaned back and closed my eyes. My body ached for sleep, but my mind was wide awake. For years I'd held on to the idea that all the sacrifices I made were invisible threads tying us closer. I thought love was proven in hours worked in bills, paid in choosing someone over yourself again and again. But that message, those 30 words, cut the thread without a sound. I imagined her there in her little high-rise apartment, arranging place cards and Spotify playlists, adjusting the lighting, laughing with people who wore tailored coats and worked in tech, people who fit the vibe. I imagined her practicing how she'd explain my absence if anyone asked, "Oh, my sister's busy," or "She couldn't make it," or "More likely it's just friends this year." And I saw myself in the reflection of the black TV screen, tired older than I should be at 31, dressed in a hoodie with a bleach stain, holding a half-dead phone in one hand and a coffee mug in the other. I wondered if I had ever fit the vibe. I stood up slowly and walked to the kitchen, pouring the cold coffee down the sink. The apartment was quiet, aside from the hum of the refrigerator and the occasional creak of the heating pipes. I looked around the same second-hand furniture. I'd hauled up 3 flights of stairs alone, the faded quilt on the couch, the small Christmas tree I'd bought for $5 from a thrift store. No gifts underneath, no cards, no lights, just me. And suddenly, the silence felt different. Not empty, but paused, like something had shifted, something real. I didn't cry, I didn't scream. I just stood there for a long time, holding the edge of the counter, letting the words echo in my head like a song that had lost its tune. Only friends who fit the vibe. That morning, before I crawled into bed, I took the dorm bill and the decoration receipt and placed them neatly in a file folder labeled Lily. I slid the folder into the bottom drawer of my desk and closed it. No drama, no declarations, just a decision. And then I turned off my phone, pulled the covers over my head, and let myself fall into the first real sleep I'd had in weeks, not peaceful, but undisturbed. Like something was ending. Or maybe something else was beginning. I woke up 4 hours later with sunlight bleeding through the blinds, and a strange heaviness in my chest, the kind that doesn't come from lack of sleep, but from dreams you can't remember, only feel. I sat up slowly, my back protesting, and for a long moment I just stared at the muted light settling across the floor. Then, unprompted, my mind pulled me backward, years, maybe decades, to a memory I hadn't revisited in so long it felt like fiction. Lily was 12. I was 21. She was standing in the middle of our old living room, surrounded by piles of clothes, her cheeks blotchy from crying because she couldn't decide which stuffed animal to bring to Seattle. She was going to a summer pre-college program, her first time away from home. I had scraped together the application fee by giving plasma twice in a week and taking on a third shift folding linens at the hospital. I remember kneeling by her suitcase, gently folding her favourite hoodie, the one with the faded unicorn print, and tucking a note into the side pocket. "You got this? Love you, always." She never mentioned the note, but she kept that hoodie for years. She wore it in the dorm photos she sent me her freshman year. Our dad had been gone 4 years by then, heart failure, sudden and brutal. I was 17 when it happened. One day, I was a high school senior, worrying about college applications. The next, I was negotiating funeral costs with a man who kept using the word economical, like it wasn't about burying a person. Mum fell apart for a while. Then she pulled herself together, just enough to fall in love with a man named Terry, who didn't like kids and liked responsibility even less. Within 6 months, she had moved 2 towns over, leaving me the house, a stack of overdue bills, and a little sister who still couldn't spell Wednesday without help. I dropped out of school and got a job at a gas station. Then another at a call centre. Then another cleaning offices at night. I thought it would be temporary just until Mum came back, or until Lily was old enough to stay with her. But weeks turned into months, and months turned into years. I taught Lily how to cook spaghetti, how to write her first essay, how to set an alarm clock and do her laundry and check her own homework. When she had nightmares, it was my bed she crawled into. When she got her first period, it was me who ran to the store, in the rain for pads and chocolate and Midol. I was her sister, her guardian, her everything, though I never said that out loud. That kind of love didn't need a label. It just showed up, every day, without fail. The apartment we shared was small, just a 1-bedroom we converted with a bunk bed and a makeshift curtain for privacy. There were times I didn't eat dinner so she could have seconds. Times I wore socks with holes because she needed new shoes. I remember walking her to school one winter morning when I had the flu. I was sweating through my coat, head pounding, but she had a math test and didn't want to be late. "You sure you're okay?" she asked, looking up at me with those big brown eyes. I smiled and said, "I'm always okay when you're okay." I wasn't. But I didn't care. All that mattered was that she had a shot at something better. I used to fall asleep fantasizing about her future, about her sitting in a college classroom, raising her hand, laughing with friends, walking across a stage in a cap and gown. And every version of that dream had one constant me in the crowd, clapping the loudest, crying the hardest. That's what kept me going. Not money, not pride, not duty. Just love. Pure, stubborn love. The kind that digs into your ribs and refuses to leave even when you want it to. Even when it hurts. The summer Lily turned 16, I bought her a second-hand laptop. It took me 5 months of saving. I remember how her face lit up when she opened the box, how she hugged me so tightly my arms went numb. "You're the best," she whispered. "No," I said, laughing. "I'm just your sister." But the truth is, I was more than that. I had to be. I didn't get to just be her sibling. I had to be her net, her shield, her lighthouse. And for a long time, I was proud of that. Proud of the way she thrived, the way she spoke eloquently, the way she could walk into a room and belong without trying. I thought I helped build that. I gave her that. But somewhere along the way, she stopped remembering where she came from. Or maybe she remembered and chose to rewrite it. Either way, I was being edited out of a story I helped write from page 1. I stood up from the couch, the memory still clinging to me like dust. I walked over to the kitchen and poured myself a glass of water, my hand shaking slightly. I hadn't thought about those years in a long time. Maybe because remembering meant feeling it all again. The weight, the sacrifice, the love, and now the loss. I set the glass down gently and stared at the wall as if it could offer answers. It didn't. But it didn't need to. I already knew. This wasn't just about Christmas. This was about everything that came before it. Everything I gave, everything I carried, and how somehow it still wasn't enough to earn a seat at her table. I used to keep a spreadsheet. Nothing fancy, just a colour-coded Excel file I updated late at night when Lily was asleep, and I was still riding the caffeine high of a double shift. It started as a way to track her college expenses, but over the years it became something else. A timeline. A quiet record of what love looks like when it's converted into numbers. Tuition, $82,450. Housing, $23,700. Books and supplies, $5,880. Food, stipends, transportation, emergencies, therapy sessions, club dues, application fees, add another $8,000 to that. I didn't count the birthday gifts or holiday flights, the mattresses I replaced after bed bugs, or the times I covered rent because her roommate forgot to pay. And I definitely didn't count the hours I spent worrying, Googling symptoms when she texted me she had a fever, or reviewing essays at 2 a.m. before her deadlines. That's not the kind of math anyone teaches you. But I did it anyway. Not because I needed her to know, but because I needed to see it for myself, proof that I had done something that mattered. And in the rare moments I let myself feel pride, I'd stare at those numbers and think, this was my part in the world. This is where my life went. There was one month, February of her sophomore year, when my bank account dropped to negative $34. I remember the screen flashing red as I logged in. Rent was due, my car needed new tyres. I had been skipping meals not for diet reasons, but because frozen waffles were cheaper than groceries. I could have told Lily. I could have asked her to take out a loan or get another part-time job or call our mum. But I didn't. I just worked another weekend shift and paid the bill. The next week, she called me screaming with joy she'd gotten a partial scholarship for the rest of the year. I listened to her talk for 20 minutes, tears welling in my eyes, not from what she said, but from what I didn't have to say. She'd made it. She was catching wind in her own sails, and I could finally loosen the grip on the rope. I never told her that my electricity was shut off for 2 days that same week. I showered at the gym and used battery-powered lamps to cook. I never told her because I didn't want her to carry the guilt. That wasn't part of the deal. My love wasn't transactional, it was quiet, patient, willing to disappear if it meant she could stand taller. There's something sacred in that kind of giving. People talk about parental love like it's the most selfless thing in the world, but siblings, especially older ones forced into the role, carry a different kind of weight. We're not celebrated for it. We're not even acknowledged half the time. We just do what needs to be done, and we do it in the shadows. One time, her laptop died the week before finals. I pawned my wedding ring our dads passed down to me after he died to buy her a refurbished MacBook. I didn't tell her where the money came from. She hugged me and said, "You're amazing." I smiled and said, "You needed it." And she did. That was always enough for me. I didn't want thanks. I didn't want some public display of appreciation or a TikTok video announcing how great her sister was. I just wanted her to live without fear, without lack. I wanted her to walk into a room and never once feel like she didn't belong. If that meant I walked out of mine quietly, so be it. And now, years later, sitting alone with a drawer full of receipts and account printouts, I realised I had done exactly what I set out to do. She had the life I dreamed for her, the freedom, the confidence, the curated Christmas dinners. I just didn't think it would come at the cost of being forgotten. But maybe that was always the risk. Maybe giving everything means accepting that, at some point, you'll have nothing left to hold on to. Not even a seat at the table you built. The signs were so subtle at first, I almost convinced myself I was imagining them. A few missed calls that went unreturned, texts that got shorter, less warm. "Busy," she'd write, or "Will call soon." But the call never came. I told myself she was overwhelmed. New job, new city, new friends. It was normal. People grew up, branched out. We couldn't be those two girls sharing a bunk bed forever. That would have been a ridiculous expectation. But then she stopped tagging me in photos. At first, I thought maybe she hadn't posted much. I checked her feed out of idle curiosity, the way you scroll just to feel close to someone. But the pictures were there, group shots at brunch, rooftop selfies, with cocktails-filtered scenes of cosy apartments and office lobbies and weekend getaways. The captions were witty, the clothes stylish, the smiles curated. I looked closer. Some of the old pictures we'd taken together were gone. Not just buried under new content, gone. Deleted, erased. The one from her graduation where I'm holding up a handmade sign that says, "She did it." The one from her 18th birthday, where I had surprised her with a trip to the aquarium, and we stood beside a giant octopus tank. The one from that Christmas where we had nothing but a rotisserie chicken and a borrowed tree, but we wore matching pajamas and laughed until we cried. All gone. I asked her once gently, "Did something happen to your old posts? Thought I remembered seeing our graduation picture up there." She replied 2 hours later, "Oh yeah, just cleaning up my feed. Trying to make it more professional, aesthetic and all." Aesthetic. That word stayed in my mouth like a piece of stale bread. I didn't respond. I didn't ask further. But something lodged itself in my gut then, a quiet knowing I wasn't ready to say out loud. I was being phased out, and not by accident. At a dinner party where she invited her co-workers, and I happened to meet one, by coincidence, he worked a temp shift at the warehouse before getting into tech. I mentioned Lily in passing. His face was blank for a second. "Lily Martinez." "Oh yeah, she talks about her mum a lot. Didn't know she had a sister." I smiled, nodded, changed the subject. What was I going to say? I raised her I was her emergency contact for 10 years. It was easier to stay quiet. Later that night, I scrolled through Lily's LinkedIn profile. It was polished, professional, self-made, one line said. Independent, said another. I wasn't angry. Not exactly. I was confused, maybe. Hurt, obviously. But mostly I felt small. Like I had been edited out of a story where I used to be a main character. Like I was a page someone had ripped out quietly, so the chapter could flow more cleanly. I told myself maybe she needed space to become who she was trying to be. Maybe my presence reminded her of things she didn't want to remember. How poor we were, how hard it had been, how many sacrifices were made in silence. Maybe I was a symbol of the struggle she wanted to leave behind. I tried not to blame her. People have a right to shape their own narratives, but it's strange being made invisible by someone you helped build. It's like watching a house you spent years constructing throw up new walls and close the door behind you. Not rudely, not violently, just firmly. Final. It got quieter in more ways than one. On her birthday last year, I sent her a voice message. Nothing dramatic, just a minute-long note reminding her of the time we baked that lopsided gingerbread house together, the year the oven broke and we used a hairdryer to glaze the icing. I ended it with "proud of you always." She didn't reply. The message showed "seen." That was it. I played it back once alone in my room, just to make sure I hadn't said anything wrong. I hadn't. But maybe that was the problem. Nothing was wrong. And still, I didn't belong. A few weeks later, I noticed she'd posted a photo album from a recent holiday party. There she was, in a gold dress, holding a martini glass, standing between a group of women in sleek blazers and curated smiles. The caption read, "Grateful for the women who raised me." I paused. In the photo, standing next to her with a hand on her shoulder, was our mum, the same woman who left us for a man who refused to remember Lily's birthday. And beneath the caption, someone had commented, "Your mum is iconic." Lily responded with a heart emoji. I stared at it for a long time. I didn't need a mention. I didn't expect a tag. But I also didn't expect to be rewritten. It wasn't just omission anymore. It was replacement. The past reimagined without me in it. One night, I clicked through some of her old posts just to see if I'd overreacted. Maybe the photos were private, not deleted. But they weren't there. The trip to Yosemite gone. Our matching Halloween costumes from when she was 13 gone. The birthday video I made where I stitched together home videos of us singing off-key in the living room all gone. It felt like erasing pencil marks, deliberate, tidy, no trace left. And maybe that's what hurt most. Not the absence, but the precision of it. This wasn't carelessness. It was curated. The same way she said Christmas would be. She wanted a life with clean edges. One where no one asked uncomfortable questions. Where the story began at the moment, she got her first real job offer, not in a cramped apartment above a nail salon, where her sister worked 2 jobs just to keep the heat on. I once overheard a podcast she was featured on. Her company posted it on LinkedIn. The host asked about her background. She said she grew up in a modest household, then pivoted quickly to the scholarships and internships, and how she clawed her way up. I waited for the part where she'd mention how she got through those first years. She didn't. I wasn't expecting a monologue, just a breadcrumb, but the silence was so complete it echoed. After that, I stopped listening. I stopped checking her pages. I told myself it wasn't good for me, and maybe that was true. But part of me still checked once in a while the way you poke a bruise to see if it still hurts. It always did. I used to think love meant showing up no matter what. Now, I was learning that sometimes it meant walking away when you're no longer wanted, even if you never asked to be needed in the first place. So, one evening, in that strange, dead space between dinner and sleep, I picked up my phone and called her. I wasn't planning to. It wasn't some grand moment of confrontation. It was more like reflex muscle memory of still wanting to try even when your heart knows better. The line rang 4 times before she picked up. Her voice was bright rehearsed. "Hey, Sarah. Everything okay?" I hesitated. "Yeah. I got your message about Christmas." "Right," she said quickly as if trying to close a door I hadn't even walked through yet. "It's going to be a really small thing this year. Just a couple friends from work, super low-key." I smiled without meaning to. Low-key with champagne flutes and $500 wreaths. She laughed, but it didn't land. You know what I mean. It's more curated. That word again, that damned word. Right, I said. I was just wondering. Not that I expected anything. But I thought maybe Sarah. Her voice shifted slightly. Less light. Look, it's just... I don't know how to say this without it sounding weird. But some of my co-workers, my friends, they wouldn't really get it. Like, who you are. It might feel awkward. For a second, I thought I hadn't heard her correctly. But I had. Every syllable sat clearly in the space between us. Awkward. I let the silence stretch. She didn't fill it. So I did. You mean it would be awkward to explain me? The person who paid your tuition or the one who paid your deposit when you couldn't afford rent your first year? She exhaled like this was exhausting for her. Sarah, don't do this. Do what I asked, still calm. Too calm. Bring up facts. This isn't about money, she said. It's about energy. The kind of energy I want to create. I felt something inside me snap, but it wasn't rage. It was clarity. The kind that stings because it confirms what you didn't want to believe. I see, I said. You want a version of yourself that doesn't come with baggage. And I'm the baggage. I didn't say that. You didn't have to. There was a pause, long enough for both of us to feel the line between us go taut. I heard someone laughing faintly in the background on her end. She was at someone's place, maybe already rehearsing her curated Christmas vibe. Look, she said, I appreciate everything you've done. I really do, but I need to move forward. And that means being around people who align with where I'm going. Not where you came from, I said. She didn't deny it. That was maybe the worst part. I have to go, she said after a beat. I'm in the middle of something. Of course you are, I swallowed, tried to keep my voice from shaking. Thanks for answering. Okay. Talk soon, she offered like a reflex. Sure, I lied. Then I hung up. I sat there for a while, phone in my lap, staring at nothing. The apartment felt smaller, quieter, like something vital had just left it. I wasn't shocked. I wasn't even disappointed. What I felt was harder to name. It was a mixture of sadness, yes, but also finality. Not a slammed door, just one that slowly clicked shut while I stood on the other side, still holding the knob. I'd called because some part of me still wanted to believe there was room, that this was a misunderstanding, that I hadn't truly been erased. But now I knew. I wasn't misunderstood. I was inconvenient. And there's nothing more humiliating than realizing your presence is a problem someone's already solved. The next morning, I woke up to the sound of rain tapping against the window, soft and steady like a reminder I was still here. I made coffee, real coffee this time, not the instant stuff I usually settled for, and sat at the kitchen table with my laptop open and a stack of old envelopes beside me. They were mostly from the bank, Lily's school, her landlord, the healthcare provider we used when she didn't have insurance. Each one with my name in the corner. Each one a quiet testament to 1,000 invisible decisions. I opened the banking app and stared at the autopay tab. Her rent for the shared apartment in San Francisco was scheduled to go out tomorrow. $1.475. I hovered over the option for a moment. Then I picked up the phone and dialed. Bank of America, how can I help you today? The woman on the other end chirped. Yes, I said, my voice steady. I'd like to cancel a recurring payment. She asked me to confirm my account details. I did. I repeated the transaction ID. And may I ask the reason for cancelling? She asked politely. I hesitated. The reason I'd never been asked that before. I thought of all the times I'd clicked confirm without thinking twice, without even checking my balance. I thought of how many nights I'd stayed late at work just to make sure that money was there for her, no questions asked. It's just time, I said quietly. Time to stop. There was a pause. Then, that's all set. Is there anything else I can help you with today? No, I said. That's it. I ended the call. For a while, I just sat there, not moving, not relieved, not triumphant, just still, like my body was waiting for permission to feel something. Then I got up and opened the bottom drawer of my desk. Inside was the folder labelled Lily, full of printouts, receipts, statements, tuition invoices, and the mortgage agreement for the loan I'd co-signed so she could stay in a better neighbourhood. I flipped through them one last time. The ink had faded on some. Others still looked fresh. All of them were pieces of a life I'd helped build, and none of them had room for me in it. I took the folder outside to the tiny balcony behind my apartment. It was still drizzling, but the wind was calm. I placed the papers in a small metal bin I used for old mail and lit a match. One by one, I fed the pages into the flame. They curled and shriveled, then disappeared. Smoke rising into the grey sky. I didn't cry. I didn't feel dramatic. It wasn't a gesture of anger, it was just necessary. Something had ended. Something else needed space to begin. I stood there until the last ember faded, then went back inside. The apartment felt colder now, or maybe cleaner, like something heavy had been lifted. I made myself a second cup of coffee and stared at my closet for a long time. My winter coat hung in the corner, frayed at the cuff's zipper broken. I'd had it since Lily was in high school. Every year, I told myself I'd replace it next year. There was always something else, her textbooks, her health bills, her travel costs, her internship outfits. I'd become an expert in going without. But today, I opened my laptop, searched for coats online, and picked one that was warm, waterproof, and cost more than I'd ever spent on myself in one go. I clicked Buy Now. It arrived 3 days later, wrapped in tissue and soft cardboard. I tried it on in front of the mirror. It fit. Not just physically, it felt like a small kind of respect. A promise I'd forgotten how to make to myself. I wore it the next morning when I walked to the grocery store. The wind was sharp, but I didn't feel it. For once, I wasn't bundled in shame or stretched thin by duty. I was just a woman in a coat she bought for herself. I passed a cafe window and caught my reflection. I looked older, tired, but there was something else too. Not pride, exactly. Not yet. But maybe the beginning of it. Maybe this was how it started, not with a grand realization or a dramatic confrontation, but with one small act of reclaiming your place in the world. Quiet, simple, final. It started with a blank page and a deep breath. Not revenge, not spite, something quieter, something cleaner. I just wanted the truth to land somewhere, if not with Lily, then with the people who had taken my place beside her. I didn't want to scream. I didn't want to humiliate. But I also wasn't going to disappear without leaving a footprint. I pulled out the old receipts I hadn't burned, tuition confirmations, Venmo screenshot statements from the landlord showing recurring transfers. I lined them up like a quiet trail of proof, not to justify myself, but to show what love had actually looked like all these years. Then I started writing. Not online, not a Facebook rant, not a Reddit post, just a letter. Old-fashioned printed, signed, each one addressed to a different person, her best friend from college, her mentor from work, the co-worker she always posted brunch photos with. People I'd never met, but who, judging from their proximity, had heard a version of Lily's story, one where I didn't exist. The letter wasn't long, just a page each. I began simply, "You don't know me, but you know my sister." I explained how I raised Lily after our dad died and our mum left, how I worked night shifts to pay her tuition, how I gave up college so she could have one, how I never expected gratitude or recognition only not to be erased. I didn't dramatize, I didn't accuse. I used numbers, years, specific details no one could fake. "I'm not telling you this because I want anything from her," I wrote. "I'm telling you this because she's hosting a Christmas party next week, and you'll probably be there. And if she tells you the life she's built came from nowhere, I just wanted you to know it didn't." I attached copies of a few documents partial, redacted just enough to paint the picture. I even included a couple of photos Lily and me in front of her first dorm arms locked. The Halloween we dressed as salt and pepper shakers. The graduation day I stood in the rain for 2 hours holding her favourite sunflowers. I signed each letter with the same final line, "I won't come," because I wasn't invited. But here's the receipt. Then I mailed them. No return address, no postmark from my town. I sent each one from a different mailbox around the city over several days. Not because I was hiding, because I wanted it to feel personal, untraceable, like the truth had simply found its way through the cracks. It wasn't about punishing Lily, it was about balance, about placing something honest next to the polished narrative she'd crafted. I didn't need them to confront her. I didn't even care what they did with the letters. I just needed the silence to break somewhere, to remind the world that I had been here, that I hadn't imagined the decade I spent building her life while mine stood still. When I finished the last envelope, I felt no thrill, no closure, just a strange lightness, like I had finally set something down after carrying it far too long, like I had for once chosen to tell my version of the story, not out of bitterness, but out of necessity. Because if I didn't, no one would. It started with a blank page and a deep breath. Not revenge, not spite, something quieter, something cleaner. I just wanted the truth to land somewhere, if not with Lily, then with the people who had taken my place beside her. I didn't want to scream. I didn't want to humiliate, but I also wasn't going to disappear without leaving a footprint. I pulled out the old receipts. I hadn't burned tuition confirmations, Venmo screenshots, statements from the landlord showing recurring transfers. I lined them up like a quiet trail of proof, not to justify myself, but to show what love had actually looked like all these years. Then I started writing. Not online, not a Facebook rant, not a Reddit post, just a letter, old-fashioned printed signed, each one addressed to a different person, her best friend from college, her mentor from work, the co-worker she always posted brunch photos with. People I'd never met, but who, judging from their proximity, had heard a version of Lily's story, one where I didn't exist. I chose them carefully. Not just the names I'd seen once or twice in tags, but the ones who seemed genuinely close. The ones who commented things like, "You're an inspiration," or "You've come so far." I picked 5. 5 people I knew could hear the story and hold it without twisting it. I sat down at the kitchen table and wrote each letter by hand. The first one made my hand tremble. It was harder than I thought to say the truth without sounding bitter, to tell the story without asking for pity. But the words came. "You don't know me, but you know my sister," I began. I was her guardian after our father died and our mother left. I paid for her school, her rent, her health care. I skipped college so she could have one. I didn't embellish, I didn't exaggerate, I let the facts speak. Then I added, "I don't want anything. I just think you deserve to know the full story behind the version you've heard." By the 3rd letter, I was steadier. I included a photo of Lily and me in front of her first dorm. She was holding a box of books, and I had my arm around her. You could see how proud I was. That's what struck me most looking at the picture again. I didn't look tired or resentful. I looked full, like someone who knew she had done something meaningful. I slipped a copy of one bank statement into each envelope, not the full record, just a highlight $4,700 in a single month for tuition and housing. Numbers are honest. People trust numbers. In one letter, I wrote, "I'm not telling you this to change your opinion of her. I only hope that next time you toast to her success, you'll also remember there was someone who lit the path behind her quietly." I paused before sealing each one. I thought about whether Lily would find out, whether she'd be angry, whether these people would confront her or just sit with the information. Maybe some would throw it away. Maybe some would wonder why she never mentioned me. But I wasn't doing it for outcomes. I was doing it to restore balance, to make sure the air around her wasn't entirely rewritten. The truth didn't need to be loud. It just needed to be known. I ended each letter the same way I won't come, because I wasn't invited. But here's the receipt. No bitterness, just reality. Then I walked one by one to different blue mailboxes across the city. I dropped each envelope like a small stone into water, not knowing what ripples they'd make, if any. I imagined someone opening the envelope in a sunny kitchen, maybe with coffee in hand, expecting a holiday card. I imagined the shift in their expression as they read, and then the moment of quiet afterward, when they'd look up and see Lily a little differently, not condemned, just contextualized. After the last one, I didn't go home right away. I walked around the block in my new coat, letting the cold air hit my face. I felt not better exactly, but lighter. I hadn't burned her reputation. I hadn't aired her life like dirty laundry. I had simply given the truth a place to breathe. And for the first time in a long time, that felt like enough. I didn't expect to hear anything. I'd mailed those letters into silence and assumed they'd vanish into polite drawers or recycling bins unopened or unread. But a few days after the last one dropped, I noticed something odd. Lily's Instagram went quiet. No countdown posts, no holiday vibes, only story highlights. No flat lay photos of table settings with tiny gold pine cones. Just silence. At first I thought maybe she was just busy. Maybe the party planning had taken over. But part of me knew. Something had landed. I imagined the scene not in vivid colours, but in sound knives against porcelain, low laughter, a toast in progress. The living room lit with warm string lights and white candles with eucalyptus sprigs. A curated playlist playing faint acoustic versions of Christmas songs. The scent of cinnamon and clove floating above a table of baked brie and vegan roast. It was a room built for warmth, for beauty, for the life Lily had so carefully designed. And then someone picked up the envelope subtle among the gifts and cards and opened it. From what I eventually heard through a co-worker of mine who knew someone at the party, Lily hadn't opened her envelope before the dinner. It had arrived that morning with her other mail, and she'd brought it along thinking it was a holiday card. One of her friends opened theirs first. Midway through dinner, while waiting for dessert, someone leaned back and said, "Hey, Lily, who's Sarah?" That was it, just that one sentence, soft but heavy, the kind that makes everyone pause without understanding why. I could picture her hands freezing above the serving spoon, eyes darting, mind spinning. "What do you mean?" she probably asked, voice too light. "This letter," the friend replied, holding up the page. "It says she's your sister." The room went quiet. The acoustic guitar in the background suddenly too clear. Her boyfriend, I'm told, looked confused. He hadn't heard about me either. Not in depth. Maybe as a passing reference. "She's not really in my life anymore," Lily said, trying to smile. "She's kind of dramatic." But someone else had read the letter too. "She paid your tuition?" they asked quietly. Another voice. "Wait, she raised you. You said your mum raised you alone. That's the danger with curated lives. The inconsistencies echo louder than the facts." She made a joke, tried to pivot. Something about the food getting cold, how she didn't want drama to ruin a good creme brulee. But it didn't work. One guest held up a photo from the envelope. "You look really young here. She's holding you." "Yeah," Lily replied, softer now. "It was a long time ago." "Still counts," someone muttered. "Her boyfriend stayed silent," they said. He looked at her, then down at his plate. That part made me ache more than I expected. Not because I wanted him to judge her, but because I knew that silence. It's the kind people give when they've just discovered they've only read the summary of someone's story. Lily left early, said she wasn't feeling well, blamed the weather or a migraine or something equally polite. I doubt anyone challenged her. That's the thing about social circles like hers, they don't confront directly, they just recalibrate. And while that was unfolding, I was at home. I'd made myself a small dinner, roasted vegetables, some chicken, a bottle of wine I'd been saving for no particular reason. The lights were soft, the window fogged from the warmth of the oven. I sat alone, not sad, just aware. The radio was playing Have Yourself a Merry Little Christmas, slow and slightly off tune, and for the first time in years I didn't feel like I was waiting for something. I didn't know what was happening in Lily's world that night, but I felt it, a shift in the air, a letting go. Maybe that's what truth feels like when it finally breathes, not thunder, just stillness. I didn't know what exactly happened at Lily's dinner that night, but soon enough the world took notice. A local blogger, one of those voices that floats quietly between lifestyle and local gossip columns, published a post the next morning. The headline read, "A sister raised her sibling in silence and got erased like she never mattered." It floated across social media like a pebble dropped in a still pond. I didn't share it. I didn't repost. I didn't tag or comment. I didn't want a spectacle. I just watched. I watched how truth travelled slow and steady until the ripples reached places where curated lives couldn't stay perfect. The post laid out the outline, plainly facts about who Sarah was, what she'd done, how much she'd sacrificed. It quoted lines from the letters, "I won't come because I wasn't invited." But here's the receipt. It humanised me, the sister, the unpaid parent, the quiet architect of someone else's life. It didn't shame Lily, but it didn't spare her either. Within hours, the article was circulating, shared quietly in comment threads, occasionally tagged under Lily's name with a shocked emoji or a sad face. I saw screenshots on my phone from strangers saying, "I never knew," or "If only she'd spoken up earlier." And then the backlash began, not brutal, but enough. Lily's follower count dropped. I saw her Instagram history shrink, unfollow here, muted there. Comments from seemingly supportive friends turned vague. "Hope everyone's okay, sending love." Wow, didn't see that coming. The tone shifted from admiration to confusion, from applause to ownership questioned. It wasn't a viral cancellation. That wasn't the point. But it was the quiet erosion of a perfect narrative. Her job at the marketing firm started feeling shaky. Colleagues whispered about the story over card parties. I heard from one mutual friend that her boss said, "We hear a lot of half stories in public relations. Maybe she wants to handle this offline." Uncertainty drifted through her network. Once, solid relationships felt brittle. Friends became distant. Invitations didn't come. Group chats shifted. The brunch group she belonged to, the study group she'd boasted about those rooms, got colder. I saw conversation threads where people typed, "You okay?" instead of "When's the party?" It was polite, concerned, yet unmistakably severe. Her world had less glitter and more glance oblique. Some days later, I walked past the same cafe where she did her story post. Sitting inside was a small group of young women, her friends, I guessed, from a flyer posted by that blogger attached to a discussion panel. The topic, "When the Untold Story Breaks." I didn't go in, but I saw them sipping coffee and staring down at tablets, probably scrolling the article, probably whispering about what they learned. Nothing in those posts was malicious. There were no dramatic revelations. But when you remove the spotlight from a lie, all that stays is shadow. Lily's fantasy life began to feel hollow, not because she was bad, but because it was incomplete. Meanwhile, I kept living quietly. My new coat hung by the door. I spent evenings in my simple apartment, writing into a journal for myself, not for the public, not for Lily. I wasn't celebrating her downfall. I was grateful that I no longer had to carry silence as a weight. On nights when I opened my laptop and didn't log into social media, I allowed myself peace. Maybe that was what victory looked like here. Not revenge, but release. I didn't see messages from Lily for weeks, but that wasn't a surprise anymore. Maybe she reached out. Maybe she didn't. It wouldn't shake me if she did. I'd reclaimed something myself, the right to exist in her narrative, even if she didn't want me there. Watching public response was never part of my plan. If I learned anything in the last few weeks, it was that truth doesn't ask permission to live, and sometimes light enters through crack in silence, not lightning. It just arrives. Maybe nothing spectacular happens, but it doesn't need to. I never expected anything after the letter drop off and the silent shifts in Lily's world. What I learned instead was that the echoes of truth would settle quietly, shifting daily life rather than bursting apart. And that's where my own new life began, a kind of rebuilding from the inside. A week after the story went live, I saw a flyer posted near the community centre, GED and adult English classes. Evening sessions. I had dropped out of high school to pay bills, but I always told myself I'd pick up someday. I never did, until now. It felt strange, a grown-up enrolling in school again, uncertain if the teacher would think I'm too old, or if the other students would stare. But there was nothing left to be ashamed of. Nothing to prove to Lily anymore. So I signed up. Every Tuesday and Thursday evening, I pushed open the classroom door at 7:00 p.m, carrying a fresh notebook and a pen gifted by the non-profit sponsoring the class. I learned how to structure essays, how to improve my vocabulary, how to express ideas in clear, confident English. The teacher, Ms. Alvarez, was kind and encouraging. She paired me with younger students who translated words I didn't know. I found I liked correcting mistakes, not just theirs, but quietly catching my own self-doubt creeping in. This was something I did for me. Around the same time, one of my co-workers, Martha from the warehouse, a woman who reminds me of someone's aunt, warm, practical, generous, invited me to her family's Christmas dinner. She said, "I know you've been working right through holidays. I'm cooking for a few people at my place. You're more than welcome." I hesitated for years. I'd thought festive events were only for people whose names were on greeting cards, but something in her voice carried no pity. Just inclusion. I showed up to her house on a crisp December evening, wrapped in that new coat I bought. Inside was laughter, the smell of roasted vegetables pies baking in the oven, kids running under the tree. No awkward questions, no burdens. I was invited because I was a co-worker and a friend, a whole person, not some trench coat silhouette someone once took for granted. They asked about work, about how I ended up in shipping, and whether I planned to switch careers. I told them I actually started GED classes. They cheered. They asked what I wanted to do next. And I answered honestly, maybe writing. Maybe helping students like me, or just passing high school first. They clapped. Someone passed me a slice of pecan pie. I took a bite. The sweetness surprised me. For the first time in years, I felt peace that wasn't tied to someone else's needs. I wasn't counting hours I worked to pay someone else's rent. I wasn't keeping spreadsheets for someone's future. I was living my own. And it didn't feel selfish, it felt essential. That winter, I walked home one night, snow falling softly. I stopped under a street lamp and looked at my breath in the light. I thought about the past few weeks, truth landing on Lily's records, my letters going out, the public reaction enrollment, in classes dinner with people who knew me as Sarah, not the sister who subsidized someone else's life. I felt something I hadn't allowed myself to feel in a long time possibility. In class, other students shared their stories. One woman from Myanmar who translated English for her children, a man who'd spent years working construction before an injury kept him from heavy labour. I sat there thinking these people were rewriting their stories too. Maybe this is what resilience looks like, not the person who never falls, but the person who decides to rise again. One evening after class, I opened my email and found a message. "We've heard your story. I'm the editor of a local education newsletter. Would you like to write about your GED journey? My breathing caught. Write my own story. For other older students who thought it was too late to change direction, I paused for a long time. Then I typed, yes, I would love to. That is how life began to reconfigure. Day by day, letter by letter, class by class, invitation by invitation. I didn't block Lily on social media. I didn't delete her photo from my phone. But I stopped watching. I stopped waiting. I unfollowed the thread that pulled my heart tight to a narrative she was rewriting. Instead, I flipped open my notebook and wrote drafts for that newsletter. It's never too late. Quitting high school doesn't define your future. Love doesn't have to be paid with invisibility. That night after dinner, I sat near the window and watched snowflakes drift past the streetlight, and I didn't think of Lily. I thought about the warmth inside the classroom where laughter interrupted wrong answers. I thought about Martha's kitchen and how she made sure I had seconds. I thought about the letters that landed truth even when it wasn't welcomed. And I thought, maybe being wanted by strangers, by kind souls who didn't owe me anything, was a beginning I didn't realize I needed. There was something powerful in just being seen. Not as a caregiver or a martyr, but as a woman who learned she could matter for no reason other than simply being there and choosing not to disappear. There was something powerful in just being seen. Not as a caregiver or a martyr, but as a woman who learned she could matter for no reason other than simply being there and choosing not to disappear. That was where I stood the morning Lily walked into the adult education centre. I hadn't expected to see her not after everything that had happened. But doors open in strange ways, and life tends to surprise you at the least dramatic moments. I was waiting to copy notes before class when I felt her standing beside me. I turned slowly, seeing her eyes already red, like the beginning of a storm, behind lashes. She couldn't quite hold steady. She swallowed a sound I recognised from childhood, the sound of someone trying to regain control. Sarah, she said quietly. The word settled between us. She'd used my name, not as a distant formalism, but as if she remembered it mattered. I nodded. Her voice cracked and then she exhaled hard. I wanted to pretend you didn't exist, but I was pretending in my whole life. It came out rushed, barely coherent, but it was true. Sarah, this sister I thought she'd erased, hung in the air. We stood there as the classroom door opened. Other students filed in oblivious. Lily stepped back, looking at the door as if it might swallow her whole. She lingered. I could feel the minutes stretching. Finally, she sat down across from me, the desk separating us, like an impossible distance reclaimed in one moment. She didn't say anything more for the first 5 minutes. Then I read the letters she said. Your voice. I heard the truth, not the version I'd made up. I'm so sorry for how I erased you. It wasn't an apology that shattered me. It was the honesty in her admission. I took a breath, feeling calm instead of angry. Lily, I said carefully, you were never embarrassing, but you made me feel like I was. She lowered her eyes, the regret in her features clear. I was ashamed, she whispered, of where I came from, of the silence, of needing someone who could pay for things I couldn't. I thought hiding all of it made me stronger, but it only made me smaller. I didn't speak right away. I looked at her. I thought about all those evenings I spent fighting invisible battles so she could thrive. I thought about the home we built with our bare hands, and I hated that she'd felt she needed to run from that. You didn't erase me by accident or because you forgot, I said calmly. You erased me because you thought I didn't fit the story you wanted to tell, because truth is messy and gratitude feels cheap if it comes with pity. Tears welled in Lily's eyes. She reached out but paused. Can you ever forgive me? She asked. Her voice was small, full of regret. I closed my eyes briefly. Forgiveness had shaped itself into something I didn't expect. Not a bridge to the past, but a marker in the present. I forgave you months ago, I said quietly. But forgiveness doesn't mean forgetting. It doesn't mean undoing what happened. It means choosing not to let hate root in my heart. And that, yes, was my choice. But it also means this, I gestured to the space between us, that I'm not promising to go back to being invisible for you. She nodded, understanding the boundaries unspoken. I understand, she whispered. If you can't, I can't ask you to go back. We sat in silence. The hum of the classroom filled in around us. Papers rustling, pens scratching, distant voices settling into routine. I felt something shift, like a page turning. Finally, she stood. She looked at me again. I'm proud of you, Sarah, for facing the truth, for not disappearing, for letting your own life take shape. I nodded. I'm proud of you too for admitting it. She paused at the door, hand on the frame. If you ever want to talk again, I'll be here when you're ready. I looked up at her. I didn't say yes. I didn't say no. I just watched her walk away, carrying the fragile weight of regret and possibility. She closed the door softly behind her. The sound echoed, not like finality, but like closure becoming possible. The door remained open in the silence it left behind. There was a kind of peace in that silence. When Lily closed the door behind her, it wasn't final or destructive. It just stayed ajar, waiting. And in that waiting, I felt something I hadn't in a long time: clarity. I walked out of the classroom, slowly carrying my notebook and pen, stepping into the late afternoon light. Snow had begun to fall again, flurries drifting across the parking lot, like confetti for endings and beginnings. I didn't look back, but I didn't need to. I felt the story shifting beneath me. That evening, I returned to my small apartment, the same place I'd come home to countless nights, sometimes exhausted, sometimes hopeful, sometimes nothing at all. Tonight, when I walked in, I switched on the soft string lights I'd draped earlier in December. They gave the living room a gentle glow, intimate and forgiving. I made myself a simple dinner, a bowl of soup I'd cooked earlier, buttered toast, a slice of baguette I treated myself to at the market. I lit a vanilla candle that smelled faintly of Christmas spices. I sat at the table and dug into my food, warmed by the lights and the smell and the quiet unfolding in my life. On the coffee table sat a small package I'd bought for myself, just a pair of warm gloves, fleece-lined and soft. I'd wanted them for weeks, ever since I started walking to class at night. I hesitated before opening it. Part of me wanted to save it. Part of me didn't want to admit I deserved something simple for myself. But I finally tore the wrapping and slid my hands into them. They fit, and they felt like armor. Not because they made me stronger, but because they felt like gentle permission that I mattered enough to deserve warmth. I curled up on the couch with a cup of tea. The snow fell outside, thin and determined, settling on window ledges. I thought about the past few weeks, Lily's return my letters, the story that found its way into public and private circles, the truth that landed quietly at a dinner table. I thought about ending payments, burning statements, sending letters out into the ripple. I thought about signing up for classes and walking into Martha's house as a guest rather than an errand. I thought about the woman I was becoming, not defined by who I sacrificed for, but by the choices I made for myself. I whispered to myself I wasn't invited to the party I paid for, but this year I hosted my own peace, and that was far more valuable. I closed my eyes and leaned back. Loving someone else had always been part of who I was, but tonight I realized loving myself is just as sacred. I didn't need fireworks, apologies, or recognition. I just needed to know I was enough, that I could start again, not for someone else, for me. My phone buzzed. A message from Martha. "You're welcome, anytime. Happy holidays, Sarah." I didn't reply immediately. I looked at the message, then at my new gloves, then at the softly lit room that finally felt like mine. Then I replied, Thank you. Happy holidays to you, too. No guilt, no longing, just peace. This Christmas wasn't about who missed me or who didn't want me. It was about who I chose to become. It was about learning that self-worth isn't about earning someone else's approval, but recognizing that you deserve to shine anyway. I finished my tea, turned off the lights, and folded the gloves neatly beside my notebook. I didn't know what came next for Lily, or for me, but I knew that wherever I walked from here, I'd carry something unwavering, the right to be seen, and the grace to keep going in peace.